hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Glad to be with you. Well, tell me something we didn't know already. We have now concluded let's go back. Back in May of 2017, after all the hue and cry because people on the left could just not believe that Hillary Clinton could lose the national election, we saw the nation give in, or the politicians rather, give in to the notion that we should have a special investigator to look into whether or not Donald Trump had colluded with the Russians to win the 2016 presidential election. Craziness. Now, the interesting thing to me is even those who are pretty significant characters on the left knew there was no collusion. As in the month after Robert Mueller was appointed special counselor, DC Shorts went in and caught a little video of Van Jones both on camera saying one thing and on the street revealing more candid thoughts.
Cyber war is real war. So you have an active attack on our country, and you have the president-elect cannot find it in himself to say this is wrong, and it needs to stop.
Hey, man.
The rest of things are be nothing but...
Really? You don't think that,
nothing ready to do?
That is very disturbing.
Indeed, it is very disturbing to go on air and say one thing and then be off air and say something totally different. So you're being paid by CNN apparently to say things that you don't necessarily believe are true. Technical term is being paid to lie, but I digress. So why is that not a problem? I mean, it is a problem, but why do you think this has been allowed to go on? Now, by the way, Mueller should never have been allowed to be the special investigator from the outset. He had conflicts on a number of fronts. So, for example, what about his ties to Jim Comey, whom Trump fired as FBI director? This is a very good friend of his. And now you're going to have a guy who's the very best friend of someone who was terminated go investigate the guy who terminated him, and you don't think that there's a conflict of interest there? It's not a matter of anything else, but this is not the guy that should be looking into this. That's one area. The second area is, well, Robert Mueller is also a former FBI director. In case you didn't notice, the FBI has some serious problems of its own with regard to the 2016 election. Maybe you've heard of Peter Strzok. Maybe you've heard of the FBI lawyer with whom he was having an adulterous relationship. Maybe you heard about the texts that went back and forth where they were talking about, even during the campaign, how are they going to stop Trump from winning? Now, how could somebody who ran that organization, was part of that organization when Mr. Strzok and Lisa Page were probably also there, at least Strzok probably was, how is he going to be someone who's going to give a fair and objective hearing of evidence involving, how's that going to work? You ran a corrupt organization. You ran the corrupt organization that tried to prevent the president's election. Now you're going to investigate the president? Wow. Wow. A third possible conflict of interest involves the case's entanglements with two of the people instrumental in Mueller's appointment as special counsel. We didn't know it when it was done, but Comey was one, and he secretly leaked or gave information to the Times to spur the appointment. And Mueller's actual appointment was made by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who we now know signed his name to at least one of the controversial wiretaps against the Trump campaign associate. To make matters more complex, Rosenstein is the one who provided President Trump a strongly worded memo supporting the decision to fire Comey, an act for which Mueller apparently also is investigating Trump. You have all kinds of conflicts which simply say one thing: not that the investigation shouldn't go forth, but this isn't the guy to conduct this investigation. Now, of course, Donald Trump has said all along there was no collusion. We don't have any issue with that. And in this, since May 2017 until March 22nd, I believe, when the report was turned in, that's 22 months almost. So 22 months, and we've had lives and reputations trampled upon. We've had people thrown in jail, convicted. We've had all this stuff. But through it all, you never heard anything about proof of collusion or obstruction of justice, which some people felt was a big deal. As a matter of fact, when the report was turned over or delivered, here's how it was covered by Fox News.
Breaking news that the Mueller report has been delivered to the Attorney General Barr. Edward Lawrence has the details. Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, exactly. This is something that we've been waiting for. We have got confirmation. Fox News confirms that the Mueller report has been delivered to the Attorney General as of 5 o'clock today. We also have confirmed from sources on the Democratic side and Republican side that the House and or that the Senate Judiciary Committee members have been alerted to come meet. It was a very short notice for the meeting. No topic exactly what that meeting is about, but we can assume that since the report's now been delivered, it's probably a briefing related to that report. We don't have details of exactly what's in that report as of right now, but again, that report has been delivered. Both members of the Judiciary Committee have been called to a meeting, possibly to be briefed about this report. Back to you.
All right, Edward, bottom line is everybody has said they want this thing released, both the president, Democrats, Republicans. How soon before that decision is made?
Yeah, and it was about, a unanimous vote there in the House to release this, make public this Mueller report. The Attorney General is the one who's going to decide exactly what gets to be public and what isn't public in this. And if you remember back to the testimony, Attorney General William Barr, when he was in his confirmation hearings, he did say he wanted to make as much of the report public as he could. So he is going to err on the side of more daylight as opposed to covering up much of what's in the report. So hopefully we'll see some or all of what's in this report. But again, that decision is going to come in the next coming weeks or so, but it's directly related to the decision that the Attorney General can make. It's his discretion.
All right, Edward, there is a lot of breaking news. I'm going to let you go.
A lot of breaking news. Yeah. Well, the Attorney General, William Barr, did release a summary of the report. So, I think the whole idea was to not have people believe he was sitting on it. He didn't release the report in its entirety. But what he did release, his summary, showed that Van Jones was pretty much a prophet. Van Jones said it was a nothing burger. Here's what you can read from the report. The special counsel's investigation determined that there were two main Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election. Nobody ever said that the Russians didn't attempt to influence the election. My question is, why didn't they go back and look into the 2012 election or the 2008 or the 2004 or 2000? Heck, go all the way back to Reagan, or at least Reagan's re-election. I'm sure they weren't crazy about him winning, and you think they did nothing to try to influence that? Of course. Only Trump. The first involved attempts by a Russian organization, the Internet Research Agency, to conduct disinformation and social media operations in the U.S. designed to sow social discord, eventually with the aim of interfering with the election. The special counsel did not find that any U.S. person or Trump campaign official or associate conspired or knowingly coordinated with the Russian Internet Research Agency in its efforts, although the special counsel brought criminal charges against a number of Russian nationals and entities in connection with these activities. You remember the 13 Russians he indicted? He's never going to try those people. Those folks are never going to see the inside of a U.S. courtroom, more than likely. But didn't find any U.S. person or anyone associated with Trump involved with anything they did. Wow. The second element involved the Russian government's efforts to conduct computer hacking operations designed to gather and disseminate information to influence the election. The special counsel found that Russian government actors successfully hacked into computers and obtained emails from persons affiliated with the Clinton campaign and Democratic Party organizations, and publicly disseminated those materials through various intermediaries, including WikiLeaks. Well, see, that's what happens when you take your mail server and keep it in a bathroom. Everybody knew what was going on. That's also what happens when you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz with her illegal IT people of Middle Eastern descent going around willing to blackmail people, conducting interesting operations. They're probably selling the information that they can find. Of course it was hacked. It was, well, to be honest, in my opinion, it wasn't hacked. Hacking means you were trying to get to information that people didn't want you to have. I don't know that the people who had this information cared or were trying to keep it away from the Russians, but that's another discussion. Again, the special counsel did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated officials to assist the Trump campaign. Russia wanted to collude with Trump to win the election, and the Trump campaign said, no, we don't need you, or no, we don't want you, which would have been the better response. This is not the way we're going to win. If we're going to win, we're not going to win because Russia helped us. No collusion. The report's second part addresses a number of actions by the president, most of which have been the subject of public reporting, that the special counsel investigated as potentially raising obstruction of justice concerns. After making a thorough factual investigation into these matters, the special counsel considered whether to evaluate the conduct under department standards governing prosecution and declination decisions, but ultimately determined not to make a traditional prosecutorial judgment. The special counsel therefore did not draw a conclusion one way or the other as to whether the examined conduct constituted obstruction. Instead, for each of the relevant actions investigated, the report sets out evidence on both sides of the question and leaves unresolved what the special counsel views as difficult issues of law and fact concerning whether the president's actions and intent could be viewed as obstruction. The special counsel states that while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Stop right there. Intent. If you remember correctly, when Comey failed to refer charges to the Department of Justice for Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information, his whole thing was that he determined that her intent was not to break the law. So I wonder how it was that his good pal Robert Mueller couldn't determine Donald Trump's intent. And if you and the whole problem is this: there's evidence for and against, and I'm sorry, if you're going to try to find somebody guilty of a crime, you need to have evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And if you have exculpatory evidence, you're going to have a hard time proving that. So they didn't even bother with it. Now, here's the interesting thing to me. Had they simply consulted one of the leading legal minds in this country, who happens to be a lifelong Democrat, and a liberal Democrat at that, they would have had the answer to whether or not Donald Trump committed or even could commit obstruction of justice. Here's Alan Dershowitz from December of 2017.
The Judiciary Committee has an investigation going as well, and it involves obstruction of justice. And I think what we're beginning to see is the putting together of a case of obstruction of justice.
Really? Is that the way it is? Democratic Senator and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dianne Feinstein, who's being primaried, by the way, claiming she sees an obstruction of justice case forming against President Trump. Is there actually a case? Let's ask Harvard Law School professor, lifelong Democrat, and author of Trumped Up. It says still out right now, Alan Dershowitz. Professor, is she right? Do you see a case for obstruction building?
No, I don't, and I think if Congress were to charge him with obstruction of justice for exercising his constitutional authority under Article 2, we'd have a constitutional crisis. You cannot charge a president with obstruction of justice for exercising his constitutional power to fire Comey and his constitutional authority to tell the Justice Department who to investigate, who not to investigate. That's what Thomas Jefferson did. That's what Lincoln did. That's what Roosevelt did. We have precedents that clearly establish that. When George Bush the first pardoned Caspar Weinberger in order to end the investigation that would have led to him, nobody suggested obstruction of justice. For obstruction of justice by the president, you need clearly illegal acts. With Nixon, hush money paid, telling people to lie, destroying evidence. Even with Clinton, they said that he tried to influence potential witnesses not to tell the truth. But there's never been a case in history where a president has been charged with obstruction of justice for merely exercising his constitutional authority. That would cause a constitutional crisis in the United States, and I hope Mueller doesn't do that, and Senator Feinstein simply doesn't know what she's talking about when she says it's obstruction of justice to do what a president is completely authorized to do under the Constitution.
So let me get specific. For example, going up to the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and saying to Senator Burr, hey, guys, can you wrap this up? Where are you at with this committee? Can you wrap this up quick? Is that obstruction?
Of course not. The president has the authority to speak to Congress, tell Congress what he wants to do, and Congress has the power to say no. We have separation of powers. You can't have obstruction of justice by each party to separation of powers exercising their authority. Look, the president could have pardoned Flynn. If he were really thinking about trying to end this investigation, he would have pardoned Flynn, and then Flynn wouldn't be cooperating with the other side. And the president would have had the complete authority to do so, and Flynn never would have been indicted, never would have turned as a witness against him. So I think the fact that the president hasn't pardoned Flynn, even though he has the power to do so, is very good evidence that there's no obstruction of justice going on here.
Right. I think you need people, some channels are hoping to see this, and some senators are trying to go
over.
Right.
Hope over reality.
Yeah.
And the other thing they're claiming is that by the president trying to influence foreign policy during his transition, for example, by having Flynn talk to the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, and say, please either vote against the UN resolution or delay the UN resolution. Somehow that's wrong. That was the right thing to do.
Gotcha.
I think he did absolutely the right thing by trying to stop the president, lame duck, from tying his hands.
Professor. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
So let me get this straight. Mueller in his report says there was nothing going on between Trump and either the Internet Research Agency of Russia or the Russian government with respect to the election. Yes, the Internet Research Agency tried to influence things by sowing discord and putting out misinformation, kind of like political campaign ads. But Trump's people had nothing to do with that. The Russian government asked and tried, hey, can we help you win this thing? And the Trump campaign said, no, we don't want your help. And as far as obstruction of justice is concerned, Donald Trump not only did not obstruct justice, there are things that he could have done which still would have been within his right, which other presidents have done, that he opted not to do. He opted not to do. So this report comes back and says there was no collusion, and, well, we're going to punt on obstruction of justice. Alan Dershowitz just laid it out for you. And not surprisingly, Donald Trump is exultant.
Investigation. After so many people have been so badly hurt, after not looking at the other side, where a lot of bad things happened, a lot of horrible things happened, a lot of very bad things happened for our country. It was just announced there was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There was no collusion with Russia. There was no obstruction, and none whatsoever. And it was a complete and total exoneration. It's a shame that our country had to go through this. To be honest, it's a shame that your president has had to go through this before I even got elected. It began. And it began illegally. And hopefully somebody's going to look at the other side. This was an illegal takedown that failed. And hopefully somebody's going to be looking at the other side. So it's complete exoneration, no collusion, no obstruction. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, President Trump there reacting on camera. For the first time since the Mueller report was submitted to the Attorney General, the president said that it was a complete and total exoneration. He said it was a shame that your president had to go through this. Quote, this was an illegal takedown that failed.
So again, tell me something we didn't already know. The real question comes down to this. What was this all about in actuality? I find three things. One, you had to find a scapegoat for the fact that Hillary Clinton lost. She was, you know what, if you bet against Hillary Clinton a month before the election, you could have got odds in Vegas that would have allowed your great-grandchildren to retire before they were even conceived. That is how much a favorite she was. This was not an election This was to be a coronation. At long last, the smartest woman in America was going to become president. After all she had endured from her philandering husband, from Democrats who embraced her and then threw her aside for Barack Obama, and now having gotten his endorsement and being called the most qualified person to ever seek the office of president, you had to find some way to explain away how she got a bone kicked out of her electoral behind. Well, the Russians got involved there and they did some stuff, and yeah. And as the president pointed out, this whole investigation took all the focus off of the illegalities that happened on the other side. Hillary's email handling is still more than questionable, but it's not being looked into. How did the Russians get 20% of U.S. uranium? Yes. By dealing with the Clinton Global Initiative while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. How did that happen, by the way? Why would we do that? Why would you give a nuclear power fissionable material? Particularly if you don't think they're a friend. But no one's looking into that either. Or there's a myriad of other things that are going on with Clintons and Democrats. But no, why investigating Trump long and hard and screaming about it loudly in the media, all of the actors on the Clinton side have gotten a pass. The other thing this was about was delegitimizing the 2016 presidential election. See, he's dirty. He cheated. He did all this. He's got to resign. He's got to go. He's not my president. He's illegitimate. Oh, really? That's what this is all about. How do I keep the American people from really paying attention to what's going on in government, particularly on the side that leans left of center? I know. I'll investigate their choice to the point where they can't see how bad the person they rejected truly was. We're just going to keep that out of the limelight. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to report on that. We're going to continue with this idea that Donald Trump cheated all the way up to the point where a report comes out and says, yeah, about that Donald Trump cheating, didn't happen. So again, tell me something I didn't already know. Tell me something that the majority of the country didn't know. You know, there was a poll that came out, I think it was back in December of 2017, that 54% of Americans surveyed indicated that Robert Mueller has a conflict of interest. Not a potential conflict of interest. He has a conflict of interest. Let me tell you what that means. The American people, the majority of them, if the survey is of any meaning, if the poll is of any meaning, never really believed that Donald Trump was going to get a fair shake in this thing no matter what. So guess what? It wouldn't have mattered what the report had said. A number of people had already made up their mind about the investigator. Therefore, the investigation was already tainted. Again, this was all known. The only thing that was unknown was whether or not they were going to actually end this thing before the 2020 election. And the fact is, they kept it going as long as they could. It supported the 2018 midterm election. That, along with voter fraud and election fraud, helped to get the Democrats back into the majority in the House, where they are floundering. They're doing nothing of note. And now we have the answer. You spent all this time. You spent all this money. You went after all these people. And for 22 months, you come back and tell us, well, no, he didn't do it. But you put people in jail. You've taken people's livelihoods. You've tarnished their reputations. You've drained their finances over something that didn't happen. Not because they hate Donald Trump, but because they have a problem with the country that wouldn't choose their continued anti-Americanism over the Americanism that Donald Trump embodied. If you don't take this as a call to arms, then you're basically exiting the battlefield while shots are still being fired. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour. Congress has opposed the national emergency declaration made by Donald Trump. Bear in mind, this is his fourth national emergency declaration. They didn't seem to have a problem with those other three. But now this one says, oh, you're moving money around. I guess what? A national emergency specifically allows presidents to move money around that was appropriated by Congress. I don't remember this opposition when, for any of the 10 national emergency declarations that are still in effect, by the way, from Barack Obama, nor, as I said, the three previous national emergency declarations by Trump. The issue, of course, here is that what Trump wants to do with this national emergency declaration is keep a promise that he made to the American electorate during the campaign, which is to build a wall at the border. You may remember we had a partial government shutdown that lasted a record 5 weeks that really didn't affect the overwhelming majority of the nation. It did have some effect on federal government workers. 5 weeks is a long time. They furloughed some, which meant they weren't coming to work and they weren't getting paid. And then they also made some people come to work without paying them. And after a vote in the Senate in which Democrats basically torpedoed the idea that they should pay the Coast Guard their normal salaries during the shutdown instead of having them work for no pay, Donald Trump relented. Not saying that's the reason he relented, but after that vote, he did relent. And then afterward, at the time he said he could have declared a national emergency. He said he would prefer not to do that, trying to work with the Congress, who, of course, now that the Democrats run Congress, they're not interested in trying to do it all. So, on the 15th of February, we had this.
Another big story we are following tonight. President Trump declared a national emergency today to help build a wall on the southern border. Opponents are already working on lawsuits to stop it. Here's Major Garrett.
I didn't need to do this.
The national emergency declaration means the president will try to sidestep Congress and divert billions from other federal programs to accelerate border wall construction.
We're going to do it one way or the other. We have to do it. We have an invasion of drugs and criminals coming into our country.
The administration said it intends to spend roughly $8 billion to build 234 miles of steel wall. Congress approved a fraction of that, just under $1.4 billion for border barriers.
I got $1.4 billion. but I'm not happy with it.
The rest comes from the Treasury Department and the Pentagon. $2.5 billion that would have been used to fight drug trafficking and $3.6 billion for military construction projects. The administration refused to say which projects will now lose money.
I won't go into details, but didn't sound too important to me.
Fortunately, Donald Trump is not the last word. The courts will be the last word.
California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is already preparing a lawsuit challenging Mr. Trump's emergency declaration. Other states and advocacy groups may also sue. The democratically led House is likely to move to block the president.
Sadly, we'll be sued, and sadly, it'll go through a process, and happily we'll win, I think.
Building the wall and having Mexico pay for it was one of candidate Trump's signature campaign promises.
And Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Don't worry about it.
With the 2020 race already underway, the president acknowledged the political realities.
For the election, I've already done a lot of wall for the election, 2020.
Mr. Trump also brushed aside fears from some Republicans that he was setting a precedent for future Democratic presidents to pursue policies the GOP strongly opposes.
The courts will determine that. Look, I expect to be sued. I shouldn't be sued.
The president did not mention this today, but his emergency declaration also gives the Pentagon the power to call up and deploy the reserves to assist in border wall or border barrier construction. Now, no such order has been given, but the authority, pending legal challenges, now exists. Jeff?
Major, thanks very much.
Can I ask where all this fear-mongering was when Donald Trump did his 3 prior national emergency declarations? Because this is his 4th. Can I ask where all this fear-mongering was when Barack Obama issued those 10 national emergency declarations that are still in effect? Remember, Barack Obama only had a Democrat majority in Congress for his first 2 years. After that, it was majority Democrats in the House, majority Republicans in the House, and then later, after 2014 midterm, you had a majority in the House and Senate of Republicans. Where was all the fear-mongering? Oh, that's right. Only progressives do the fear-mongering. So that's interesting. So after that declaration, it took 11 days for the House to get their act together, and they did this.
The Honorable Speaker, Nancy Pelosi.
Well, we are not going to give any president, Democratic or Republican, a blank check to shred the Constitution of the United States. We would be delinquent in our duties as members of Congress if we did not overturn what the president is proposing. He is asking each and every one of us to turn our backs on the oath of office that we took to the Constitution of the United States.
If Congress allows this president's emergency declaration to stand, will not have ramifications only on this matter or the building of a border wall, but if the president is successful, he will likely come back for more.
Joint resolution relating to a national emergency declared by the president on February 15th, 2019.
On this vote, the yeas are 245, the nays are 182. The joint resolution is passed without objection. The motion reconsidered is laid on the table.
And the House declared their victory. We stood up to Trump. Now, after this, the Senate moved at a little bit more deliberate pace, and there was a lot of political drama there as one GOP senator after another said, we think this is a constitutional crisis, and we don't want the president to have the power to do. Of course, they left out the part that he already has this power. Every president's had this power. They left that part out. Woodrow Wilson was the first one that I'm aware of who was declaring national emergencies, and when he did it back in the 1910s, there was no recourse for Congress. Congress had no recourse until 1976 regarding a presidential declaration of an emergency. President's emergency powers are pretty sweeping in the Constitution, by the way. Nevertheless, on the 14th of March, there was finally a vote, kind of anticlimactic one, in the Senate.
Are there any senators wishing to change their vote?
If not, the yeas are 59, the nays are 41. The joint resolution is passed.
Mr. President.
Senate be in order. The Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 20.
The questions on the motion to proceed. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion's agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination. The judiciary, Bridget S. Bade of Arizona to the United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Bridget Bade of Arizona to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit.
Ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to calendar number 27, Senate Joint Resolution 8.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 27, SJ Res 8, Joint Resolution recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 27, SJ Res 8, a joint resolution recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal signed by 17 senators as...
I ask consent the reading of the nays be waived.
Without objection.
I withdraw the motion to proceed.
The senator has that right.
I move to proceed to calendar number 15, H.R. 268.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 15, H.R. 268, an act making supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2019, and for other purposes.
The cloture motion of the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the
vote kind of happened in stride and they moved on to other business. I want you to take note of something. In the House, the vote was 245 against 182 in favor of the resolution. In the Senate, it was 59 to 41. So here comes the problem, because 2 days after the Senate made their dramatic statement that they don't agree with the president, and the House made their resolution. So you have both houses of Congress standing up and saying, Mr. President, here is our resolution and you need to sign it so that this national emergency will no longer be declared. Yeah.
President Trump signed his first veto, but the fight over his emergency declaration on the southern border is far from over. Mr. Trump defended his action on Twitter today. But Democrats say they plan to override it and keep the pressure on. Nicole Killian is at the White House with the next phase of the border battle.
I'm very proud to veto it.
Before the ink could dry on President Trump's first veto to uphold his national emergency declaration, congressional Democrats threatened to override.
We all knew it was going to be a veto, and they're not going to be able to override. It's going to go very quickly.
The president seemed unfazed as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi scheduled to vote for March 26th, accusing him of a power grab.
It's more about the constitutional issue here, the president taking the power of the people's Congress.
Senate Democrats realize it's an uphill climb to get a two-thirds majority in both chambers, but they say they'll bring up the same resolution to block the president's border emergency again if they have to.
We got to defend it 10 times, even if they knock it down in hopes of winning the 11th.
12 Senate Republicans crossed party lines to defy the president.
We must stand up and defend Congress's institutional powers.
The declaration, which seeks to reprogram billions of dollars from the military to fund a border wall, now faces legal challenges, including a lawsuit from 20 states.
The fact that the Senate basically rebuked the president by its vote this week makes those cases stronger than they were earlier this week. That certainly helps the litigation, and we really just kind of have to wait and see what the courts say.
During the veto signing, the president said they shouldn't be suing and that he has a strong and powerful case. The attorney general also backed him up, telling him what he's doing is solidly grounded in law. Rena?
Nicole Killian at the White House.
Why does that veto matter? I mean, it was going to happen anyway. He told you he was going to veto it. Because they don't have the votes to overturn it. They got 245 votes in the House. They need 290 to override a veto. They had 59 votes in the Senate. They need 67 to override a veto. And the veto must be overridden in both houses of Congress. Not likely to happen. Somehow, of course, the states believe that they now get to have a say in this, and they're stepping up to the plate to come after it. Because I think it was just a few days after the declaration was made, the states were beating a path to the courthouse steps.
Well, California leading the charge. 16 states now filing a lawsuit against President Trump's national emergency declaration. The suit heading to the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The president predicted that, and he's tweeting about it this morning, saying this: I predicted 16 states, led mostly by open border Democrats and the radical left, have filed a lawsuit in, of course, the 9th Circuit. California, the state that has wasted billions of dollars on their out-of-control fast train with no hope of completion, seems in charge. William Lajeunesse is live in Los Angeles. William, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. The states argue, one, this is not an emergency, and two, that the president cannot divert money Congress already appropriated for another purpose. Joining California, 15 states all have Democratic attorneys general and all but Maryland Democratic governors. Now, the suit is filed in the liberal 9th Circuit, where judges have already ruled against the president in 9 major cases. It seeks an injunction to stop the president from building a barrier at the border while the case is argued. It calls the emergency declaration, quote, unconstitutional and unlawful, and that the states must protect their residents, natural resources, and economic interests from the president's flagrant disregard of fundamental separation of powers principles.
Responsibility to determine where our taxpayer dollars go is Congress's responsibility. Donald Trump cannot usurp that obligation and privilege. He's trying to do that through this fabricated emergency declaration.
Now, the president says the 1976 law allows him to build the wall because hard narcotics, crime, and a surge of immigrants at the border present a national security risk. But he also said, and this is likely to be used against him, that the situation is not an emergency.
It's an invasion. We have an invasion of drugs and criminals coming into our country. I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
So this could play out for a year or more, Sandra, as the two sides argue over congressional and presidential powers, but it also makes border security and immigration a central issue again in 2020. Sandra?
All right. William Lajeunesse, thank you.
I cannot for the life of me figure out why progressives and others who oppose Donald Trump would want border security on the ballot in 2020. They lost on that issue. They lost convincingly. They lost an election they believed they had in the bag. They were already picking out Hillary's curtains for the Oval Office, and they lost on this issue. Other issues as well. But if you really want to go against Donald Trump, who's trying to do what he told the American electorate he would do, when what you want to do is leave the border open. If you're not aware of what's going on in I think it's El Paso, where they're expected to make 250,000 apprehensions, and those people are going free, and the Catholic Church is helping turn them loose in this country. Helping to turn them loose. Picking them up, reaching out to them, bringing them over on this side of the border, giving them bus tickets and sending them on their way. It's ridiculous. If you really think, progressives, that that is a winning issue for you, you guys don't learn very well. I almost feel bad for you. And maybe you haven't figured this out, but this whole thing with the state suing, why does this not seem like a replay of the travel ban, which they tried to call a Muslim ban, which it was not? when they went to liberal, progressive judges in Massachusetts and Hawaii and the Ninth Circuit, and they fought the president and they got temporary victories until it went all the way to the Supreme Court and got pimp slapped and Trump prevailed. And when that occurred, there was only one Trump appointee on the Supreme Court. Now there are two. And the president is within his right in the Constitution to declare an emergency on whatever grounds pleases him. The Constitution does not restrict him to declare an emergency only when the states agree. If the states want relief on this, they need to send delegations that would help make a veto overturning majority. They don't have it. Or they can choose a new president in 2020, which I don't think yet is likely. Otherwise, I don't even know what the basis of the lawsuit is. It's not an emergency. It's the president's call, just as it has been for all of the emergencies that are still on the books. If I remember correctly, there's more than 30 that are still in effect, and only 4 of them are from this administration. The oldest one was from Jimmy Carter, dealing with Iran hostages. That's still in effect and has to be maintained every year by every administration to keep it a national emergency. So they kept that plate spinning for more than 4 decades. This is all about keeping drama in the headlines to wear you down and to convince the low information people who do vote that Donald Trump is some type of danger. What they're really trying to do is to convince low information American voters that American citizens, whom Trump represents and is representing them both accurately and well, that they are somehow a danger to America. That, along with voter fraud and election fraud, which we saw in 2018, could be enough to turn the tide against Donald Trump. Problem is, and I keep saying this never has been about Donald Trump. It's always been about the American people. They're out to take you down. And with that, I'll turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and then afterwards we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
For years, I have accurately proclaimed that the number one enemy of America is the government school system. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, many of us understand that what is taught to one generation dictates the direction the nation takes in the next. Any school system that indoctrinates an individual who is elected to government and proposes abolishing airplanes and cows and the ability of we the people to create wealth is bad enough. But when enough people are convinced they should support and vote for someone who wants to turn the United States into a giant Venezuela, then it's past time to take swift action to establish real education that teaches authentic history, mind-building math, English, etc., and supports a higher moral code. When Johnny and Maria can't tell the difference between right and wrong, and their parents don't have enough sense to discriminate the crucial differences, instruct their children accordingly, then the rest of us have a responsibility of standing up and stopping the government school indoctrination madness before Khrushchev's wish to see America buried comes to pass. I'm Ron Edwards. Let's meet Fridays on AmericaMatters.us, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, and 12 a.m. Sundays on Talk America Radio Network.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by David E. Garrett Jewelers.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction.
We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it's made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we're getting more GOP Green Deal nonsense. That's my word. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the one who brought this noise and funk into D.C., and when she became a congresswoman, here she is. I can't remember exactly which conference or interview or debate this was, but she was on a stage in a casual setting talking to an audience back on the 22nd of January, and Daily Caller caught this part of her remarks.
Millennials and people, and Gen Z and all these folks that come after us are looking up, and we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And this is the war. This is our World War II. And I think for younger people, we're looking at this and we're like, how are we saying let's take it easy when 3,000 Americans died last year? How are we saying let's take it easy when the nth person has just died from our cruel and unjust criminal justice system? How are we saying take it easy when the America that we're living in today is so dystopian, with people sleeping in their cars so that they can work a second job without health care, and we're told to settle down? It's a fundamental separation between that fierce urgency of now, the why we can't wait that King spoke of, that at some point these chronic realities do reach a breaking point. And I think for our generation, it's reached that. And I wish I didn't have to be, doing every post, but sometimes I just feel like people aren't being held accountable. And until we all start pitching in and holding people accountable, I'm just going to let them have it.
It's going to break down. Is it in 2040? It's just kind of sort of slightly, so they don't actually. It's sort of slightly over the horizon, or it's just on the horizon. So we're aware of 2040, but we're not going to be held to our forecast. Even during the Nazi period, you see this strain of anti-industrialization, and it happens to be the case that the first political party anywhere in the world to have a wind power program was the Nazi Party. And 6 weeks after invading the Soviet Union, Adolf Hitler was telling his dinner companions that wind power is the future.
Spend trillions of dollars that we don't have over a couple decades. It would totally destroy the coal and fossil fuel industry. And with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's constantly wrong, but never in doubt. She's walking the halls of Congress trying to get people to sign up for this thing. But again, it's only going to further disenfranchise middle America to the Democrat Party, but she's definitely catering to the elites in Malibu and Manhattan. But she's going to lose Missouri, Indiana, in the middle of the part of the country, talking about eliminating hundreds of thousands of jobs, raising utility costs, and spending trillions of dollars we do not have.
Well, she might, unless you listen to the media. And it's clear that other people are listening to the media, but she's actually one of them. She hears the criticisms of her ideas and criticisms of her person and her personality and her approach. And by March, she was modified a little bit, and not in her ideas, but she's learning the delivery game in D.C. So Peter Doocy of Fox News caught up with her on March 14th, and her comments on global warming and the Green New Deal that she has launched were a little bit more palatable.
Commissioner McConnell filed for a procedural vote on your Green New Deal resolution. I'm just wondering if what's going on that, everything is ready.
I look forward to us having a real vote, not just a procedural vote.
And what do you think it's going to take to convince Mitch McConnell to act differently?
I don't know. I wish that he would also prioritize H.R. 5, which actually reinstates voting rights and helps get money out of politics. But he doesn't seem to be interested in improving our democracy. He seems more interested in running procedural votes.
And then, if you have time for one more, the AFL-CIO sent you and Senator Markey a letter that said that they consider some of the provisions in the Green New Deal a threat to their workers. What do you say to that?
Well, if I recall correctly, the head of the AFL-CIO, Mr. Trump, did not sign that letter. So I don't know if it's an official position, but what I do know is that the Green New Deal is looking forward. These are all about mass investment in infrastructure and jobs, particularly we're talking about steel workers, electrical workers. There's there's so much work to do in transitioning to 100% renewable energy, and we have to do that work with union labor. We have to do that work with by reinvigorating our entire workforce. So I don't think that that it's representative of an actual split.
And is it too early for us to ask what you think about the 2020 Democrats who are talking about the Green New Deal? But just everybody gets asked about the Green New Deal.
Well, I mean, it's a winning issue. We're talking about 67% of Iowa voters in the caucus support the Green New Deal, and now 91% would prefer a candidate that's talking about it. So clearly, it's a jobs plan. It's a community turnaround plan. We're talking about putting tons of money and investment, and not just throwing it away and use this infrastructure, but in getting us to cheaper energy and to, in really reinvigorating our economy in a real way in rural areas and in urban areas.
All right, thanks. Have a nice recess.
Wow. So she's learned the game. She has. Well, what about Mitch McConnell? Well, I look forward to actual votes. What about this letter from the AFL-CIO? Well, it doesn't look like Mr. Trump has signed it, so I don't know if it's a real position. But she hasn't changed anything that she thinks. And that, of course, is the issue, what she thinks. And the worst part about this now is the contagion has spread to the Republican Party. For example, Matt Gaetz, back in February, kind of seemed like he had at least some type of legislative crush on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and perhaps it was about medical marijuana or something else. TMZ caught up with him back in February, and he had this to say.
Good Congressman Bates, how you doing, man? Good. I mean, what's the story? They're calling you the conservative AOC? Well, that's totally unfair. AOC is way more interesting and attractive and capable than I am. I am just probably a lot more conservative. So I would aspire to have her game, but I don't think I have it in terms of engagement with the electorate. So you're a conservative guy. All I hear about AOC online is all this negative stuff that people call her off and, whatever, they take shots at him. What do you see in there?
I think that reasonable people can disagree on the substance of our ideas, which are probably dangerous for the country, but sometimes haters just gotta hate, man, and that's not what I'm about.
So, are you pissing people off in your own party, kind of like what she's doing?
Listen, the biggest difference in this town isn't whether people are Republicans or Democrats. It's whether they want to shake the place up or not. She does, and I admire her for it.
What's the best thing about AOC, you think?
She wants to engage in medical cannabis reform.
All right, so you guys can be kind of like a power couple together, a Republican and a Democrat on this.
I don't know. That might be a little presumptuous of me, but I would certainly swipe right on the opportunity to write a cannabis bill with her.
All right, quickly, can you dance like her?
I cannot. I can't dance at all.
All right, man. Thanks, Congressman.
If it stopped there, I wouldn't give it a second thought. There are people who think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an attractive female. I'm not among them. To me, she looks like a horse when she smiles, but maybe that's just me. But our good friend, Mr. Gates, has actually put out a competing resolution recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a Green Real Deal. We don't have this discussion unless the Green New Deal has come out. I've read through the Green Real Deal resolution, which basically says a bunch of nothing. It simply pulls the GOP toward Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's position. Maybe it is strategic to try to blunt her initiatives, but it's still a place I'm not looking to go. What do I think I'm going to have in common with someone who honestly believes that the world is going to end in 12 years? Oh, if we don't do something about climate change. Really? What is it we're supposed to do about climate change? We got to stop it. So what are we trying to stop? Are we trying to stop global warming? Or are we going to acknowledge that we've gone into a solar minimum and we're looking at the possibility of another ice age, another mini ice age, like was seen back in the 17th century? What are we trying to stop? Now, we weren't doing anything in the 17th century, at least not as much. So are we going to combat that? So when and if the temperatures drop, please explain to me what all you're doing or want to do. How's it going to help? And what the heck does the climate have to do with law enforcement and the justice system and health care? How does all this get mixed up together? And it's not just Matt Gaetz of Florida. I mentioned before, because after him, Buddy Carter of Georgia, he was gone off the deep end with this as well.
I believe that my colleague just asked all of you a question of whether you believed that climate change was real or not. I think if you were to ask that same question to everyone up on this dais, that they would say the same thing. Yes, it is. It is real. It's something that we have to address.
Well, tonight a growing number of Republicans are calling for real solutions to the climate crisis, slamming the progressive Green New Deal as a job killer that's too expensive and unrealistic, instead pushing for American innovation alternatives. Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia is among the Republicans pushing back on the Green New Deal. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to you, and thanks for being here. So let's start off with the premise to all of this. Are you a Republican that believes that climate change is a real issue and a crisis?
Oh, absolutely. Climate change is real. Protecting our environment is real. We acknowledge that. The climate's been changing since day one. There's no question about that. And we've got to address this. It's important to Americans. And I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for the United States as the innovative leader in the world to create more jobs, to lead in innovation. So not only do we acknowledge that it is real, but we're also excited about the potential that exists here in new technology and creating new jobs and everything.
So what's the pitch?
Well, the pitch is that, we've got to adjust. Two things: adaptation and innovation. Adaptation, adapting to the new environment and to the changes that are happening here. I represent the entire coast of Georgia. At one time I was a mayor and I was on a planning commission. The things that you can put in place now The policies that you can put in place can save you so much in the future. I learned that, and I recognize that. That's what we need to be aware of. When we're building infrastructure, we need to make sure we're building infrastructure in a way that's going to counteract rising sea levels or things of that such.
So is this something that could interest perhaps Democrats who have taken to the idea of the Green New Deal?
Well, listen, the Green New Deal is pie in the sky. I mean, that is something that's going to destroy our economy if we were to follow that, and God forbid we follow it. But that would destroy our economy. It would destroy industries. That is not the answer. There's no question about it. But we do have to have sensible, rational, reasonable solutions to this, and we can have that, and that's what we're proposing in the Republican Party.
Well, some of your Republican colleagues seem to continue to take on some of the policies that have been implemented by the left in states like California. Congressman Nunes tweeted this out. At restaurant tonight, waitress asks if we want straws. Says she has to ask now in fear of the straw police. Welcome to socialism in California. Final thought from you, Congressman. How far does your proposal go?
Well, certainly, I'll have to speak to Devin about the straws, but nevertheless, our proposal hopefully will be a sensible one. Look, we know that we owe it to our children, to our grandchildren, to leave them with a clean environment. We want to do that, and we can do that through innovation. I have all the confidence in the world of the innovative
How much is it going to cost?
Well, it's not going to cost as much as the trillions of dollars that the Green New Deal would cost. That's for certain. But there will be some costs associated with it, and certainly we're not interested in any kind of carbon tax. Let me make that clear. But at the same time, we can actually benefit from this. It could actually end up helping us and helping our economy.
All right, Congressman Buddy Carter, good to get your thoughts on all of that. We'll be following that for sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So what Matt Gaetz and Buddy Carter have in common is both of them believe that climate change is real and that human beings are involved with that or responsible for that. Mr. Gaetz actually put that out there in a tweet and took some heat from some of his Republican colleagues. The other thing they have in common is they both have no idea what they should do. We got to do something. If you read through Matt Gaetz's resolution, it says nothing about what should be done. The other thing that you should always remember, the federal government has never solved a problem that did not involve a war. Unless the federal government is involved in a war to protect the Constitution of the United States, it sucks at just about everything else it might possibly do. It can't even run the post office. Bear that in mind. Because all this really comes down to polling. If you go back to what Miss Ocasio-Cortez said, well, we have 91% of folks in Iowa and all this other stuff going on. Yeah, you know what? There is a poll out there that says more than 80% of registered voters support the Green New Deal being pushed by progressive Democratic lawmakers. That's a report from The Hill that came out in December 2018. Problem is, that same poll, when you dig into that poll, 82% of the people polled didn't even know what the New Deal was until this questionnaire showed up online. And it's real hard. I'm having a hard time finding what the questions in the questionnaire actually were. So you have 80% of people who didn't know what the heck was going on now agree with some parts of what you said. What did you say? All this messaging is designed to do one thing. If we can get you to agree with any of it, we're going to try to hang all of it around your neck. And the Republicans are coming out here and saying, well, let's go ahead and jump on this message and give them the climate change thing, but tell them what they want to do about it is wrong. And when is the last time that you ever adopted the lexicon or initial position of an enemy and actually defeated them? And make no mistake, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an enemy, an elected domestic enemy of the United States of America. I know people don't want to think of her that way. She's just passionate and she's sincere and I don't want to hear it. The stuff she's talking about is crazy. The planet's going to end in 12 years unless we do. What we are you talking about? China's not going to do anything. India's not going to do anything. Africa's going to do less than nothing. So it's just the United States. Canada? Is Canada going to do something? Mexico? Mexico's going to tell you to blow it out your ear because they're going to end up paying for the wall. What are you proposing that is going to change anything in the world as though we are so significant? Let me help you out. Human beings might end, but the world's not going to change at all. Understand that. And as for global warming, always remember that the data is flawed.
It's a peer-reviewed, and I love how they emphasize this is a peer-reviewed study, because that's what you always hear from the global warmists. It says almost all of the supposed warming is coming from scientists adjusting the temperatures. And we've talked about before how they go back and they adjust temperatures. Now, why are you adjusting temperatures from the 1940s?
Right.
How do you know today in 2017 what the temperature was on July 10th in 1943? You don't. You don't. They probably knew then, but you don't know now.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't know now.
And this is one of the things that, because people have, I've never seen it compiled like this before. There have been, skeptics have pointed this idea out before, that what they do is not necessarily adjust the current temperatures higher to get more warming.
Although they have done some of this, according to this study, they have done that too.
One of the things is they go back and they make the old temperatures colder.
Right.
So it looks like it's warmed more from back then to today. Now they show...
Of course, the 30s and 40s were hot. They were really warm periods, warm decades. And so now we're making them cooler. They're not as hot as they once were.
And the important thing here is the rate of the warming, because the rate of the warming is something that they can, it's not even how much it's warmed, it's what is the rate, so how much per decade. So they can extrapolate that to make global warming look intensely horrible if the rate is fast. If the rate is slow, it's not as big of a deal. And when they're talking about hundreds and in some cases thousands of years, it makes a big difference. But you look at the difference between the 1980 chart of temperatures and the 2015 chart of temperatures. They reproduce every single chart all against each other, and you're talking, almost all the warming is because of this,
because of the adjustments.
Holy cow!
Exactly. The warming that everyone is fired up about, pardon that term, has more to do with people going back and looking at historical temperatures and revising them downward than anything that is going on today. People want to ignore that the polar ice mass, the Antarctic ice sheet is larger. They want to ignore that there is actually a solar minimum that's already arrived that is driving temperatures lower. They want to ignore all that. Why? Because this is a way for progressives to dictate to you how you should live. And now we have Republicans jumping on the bandwagon, trying to capture those voters because they fear that they're going to be locked away by progressive Democrats. This is dangerous, folks. It really is dangerous. Let me try to get ahead of this. No matter which side we're talking about, this is a federal power grab. This is the federal government saying, unless we do something, your life is going to be terribly worse. Isn't this the same thing they told us about Social Security? Unless we step in, everybody's going to be starving on the street. And now Social Security, along with Medicare, have unfunded liabilities that dwarf the more than $20 trillion of national debt. You haven't made our lives better. You've made our lives unaffordable. You've made children, American children in the womb are coming out saddled with debt and liabilities that they did not create and that are impossible to pay because you want to tell people that they've earned something. How do you earn something that creates debt for the next generation? You don't. Ocasio-Cortez has likened her Green New Deal as a great idea like the war on poverty. The war on poverty devastated and continues to devastate the black community in America. Nothing has ravaged. Slavery did not ravage black people the way the war on poverty did. The black family, despite the ravages and horrific acts that could occur in slavery, was more intact during that time than it is now. Liberals don't like to hear that. The Negroes, KNEE-GROWS, they can't stand that knowledge, but it's knowledge anyway. It doesn't matter whether or not you believe the truth. As they say, it's true anyhow. The New Deal that Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought to America, kept America as the only major nation that actually experienced the Great Depression. Everybody experienced the global depression, but only America went through the Great Depression. Germany was recovering from reparations, and while we were still stuck with double-digit unemployment, Hitler, of all people, managed to lead the German economy back to the point where they had recovered enough to wage another war. Poor countries don't start wars, by the way. And while he was invading Poland, we were still looking at double-digit unemployment. No, the war on poverty sucked. The New Deal didn't work. And now you want to bring out the Green New Deal because you think the world's going to end in 12 years. Here is the problem. When we get to year 13, what's your story going to be then? Because you know they're going to change it. Just like back in the 70s, they told us an ice age was coming, and now it starts to sound like they're going to tell us another one is on the way. This whole climate thing is cyclical, and the progressives are one thing consistently, and that is wrong. All of their predictions are wrong. If the progressives were correct, we would have died off from heat or cold decades ago. If they were correct and people could not make changes, then we would have starved decades ago because population growth was outstripping the food supply until man made a change in grain that allowed us to feed the entire world. You're going to have to look at all this stuff honestly and tell these people they're full of it. Whether they are Republican or Democrat, so-called conservative or progressive. Global warming is a hand-waving argument. The climate will always change. It's been changing since there's been a climate. And mankind has always adjusted. And now we have the technology to make those adjustments for the benefit of more people than we have before. You just roll with the punches because Earth is going to do what it's going to do. There's not a whole lot you're going to do about it. But if you let people take over your lives to chase some idea that only manages to enslave you while they continue to live well, then you're stupid. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida, Talk Radio. Freedom in America Radio.com. and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. And we have this movie that has more remakes than the Rocky franchise show up once again. The unarmed black male, teenaged, but doesn't always have to be, and I put unarmed in air quotes as though it really matters. It rarely does. Nor should it. But a young black male was shot and killed by a police officer. By a police officer who happened to be white. There's always white cops. You do realize that there are far more white people willing to police in black neighborhoods than there are blacks willing to be police officers. You do realize that. If you're going to run into a cop in a black neighborhood, there's a greater chance that he's not going to be black. Because if we actually took care of our own neighborhoods, this probably wouldn't be happening. Nevertheless, back in June of last year, Antoine Rose, don't know why I got there, Antoine Rose, a 17-year-old black male, was shot and killed by police. Apparently he was fleeing a car. At least there was video of him running away from a car when he was shot by police officers. And of course that's when the outrage showed up. But unlike many other cases, this time there was a twist. The shooting occurred, an investigation ensued, and we had this.
An East Pittsburgh police officer has been charged with criminal homicide after shooting an unarmed teenager in the back. 30-year-old Michael Rosfeld shot 17-year-old Antoine Rose 3 times after pulling over a vehicle that he said matched the description of a car that was involved in a drive-by. Cell phone video surfaced on Facebook shortly after the incident, showing Rose trying to run away as the shots were fired. Protests erupted in Pittsburgh over the weekend, demanding justice for Antoine Rose. Here's the district attorney addressing the case earlier today.
Rosfeld's actions were intentional, and they certainly brought about the result that he was looking to accomplish. He was not acting to prevent death or serious bodily injury. It's my position that he is not entitled to a justification charge to a jury as a defense, inasmuch as under Pennsylvania law, if you are effectuating an arrest, you have to show the person to be arrested has committed a forcible felony. As I said already, Antoine Rose didn't do anything in North Braddock other than be in that vehicle.
For more, we turn to Amy Wattis from our Pittsburgh station KDKA for the latest.
Allegheny County District Attorney Stephen Zappala said his office objected to releasing East Pittsburgh police officer Michael Rosfeld on $250,000 unsecured bond. Now, as for that charge of criminal homicide, Zappala said he has evidence to show third-degree murder in this case. He said right now he will ask the jury to consider all degrees of homicide. He said he has a right to argue first-degree murder. In the criminal complaint, police say Rosfeld told them conflicting stories. In the first story, police say Rosfeld noticed Antoine Rose, who was the front passenger in the car, turn his hand towards him. Rosfeld said he thought he saw something dark, which he thought was a gun. Then he fired shots. In the second story, Rosfeld told detectives that he did not see a gun when Rose ran. Now, Zappala said Rosfeld did not see a weapon on him based on those interviews and witness accounts. Now, also charged today was 17-year-old Zaywan Hester. Police say he was involved in that shooting incident in North Braddock that took place prior to the incident in East Pittsburgh. He's facing multiple charges, including criminal attempted homicide. According to the criminal complaint, the jitney driver told police that Hester, the passenger in the back of his car, was the one who fired shots at the victim standing on the street in North Braddock. Now, Rose, he was the front passenger in the seat. The driver was able to identify Hester out of several images shown by police and confirmed that Hester was the passenger in the backseat of the car. Now, to clarify those 3 shots that were fired, Rose was shot in the side of the face, his right elbow, and then that fatal shot to his back. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week.
So we've heard this before. Unarmed black guy running from the police, shot in the back. Now, I will give this officer some macabre credit for one thing. He shot 3 times, and he connected on 3 shots. It's not like the shooting of, say, Michael Brown, where didn't connect with everything, but he went 3 for 3. And one of those shots, indeed, killed the young man. Now, the district attorney, and I'm going to say this, and I really don't care who it offends, the most pathetic creature in these United States is a progressive white male. How are you going to try to say what happened? But nevertheless, you trying to do what you believe your job is, and I'm not going to fault you for that. So we have a cop charged, and of course you know the Negro, KNEE-GROW community rejoiced, because most of the time you will find that if this occurs, it is often determined that no crime was committed and therefore there are no charges. This district attorney had a different idea. Okay. But then during the trial, some interesting things turned up.
The jury in the Michael Rosfeld trial, he is sequestered for the night after a long day of testimony. Rosfeld is the former police officer accused of shooting Antoine Rose II. Ralph Iannotti is live with more on what happened on day 2 of the trial. Ralph.
Yeah, thanks very much, Susan. Today's testimony wrapped up around 6 o'clock this evening. Some 12 witnesses testified today. Jurors heard from police officers, crime scene technicians, and witnesses to the fatal shooting of Antoine Rose II in day 2 of the homicide trial of former East Pittsburgh police officer Michael Rosfeld, accused of 1 count of homicide in the death of the 17-year-old Rose last summer. The day's final prosecution witness was a scientist from the medical examiner's office who testified he found gunshot residue on Rose's left hand and right palm. But Daniel Wolf said the residue didn't necessarily mean Rose fired a gun. Instead, he said the residue could have come from Rosfeld's weapon. After the trial concluded late this afternoon, the Rose family attorney weighed in on Wolf's testimony.
Unfortunately, I've been a part of cases where the victims have gunshot residue on them after they're shot by a police officer. It only makes sense that someone who's been shot multiple times would have gun residue on them. And in addition to that, we know that the backseat passenger of the car that Antoine was in fired his gun within that car over 9 times.
Perhaps the day's most riveting testimony came from a witness identified as John Leach, a neighbor who lived near the East Pittsburgh shooting scene. Leach testified that the officer was standing on the sidewalk and he was panicking. Leach said the officer was repeating over and over, "I don't know why I shot him. I don't know why I fired. I don't know why I shot." Under cross-examination, defense attorney Patrick Tomasi asked Leach, "You wouldn't be trying to juice things up?" Leach responded saying, "I don't have any reason to." Attorney Merritt, who was not under a court-sanctioned gag order, said the Rosfeld trial is moving swiftly.
I think the trial's proceeding fairly quickly, probably quicker than I've seen before. I've counted 16 witnesses in 2 days, and that's an amazing clip. I don't pretend to know the strategy of the prosecution, but it seems that they're moving rapidly towards closing their trial.
Now, testimony expected to resume tomorrow morning around 9 o'clock, and prosecutors may rest their case tomorrow. We're live tonight downtown. I'm Ralph Iannotti, KDKA News.
Gunshot residue, on his hands. I thought you said he was unarmed. Well, it could have, but could have come from being shot multiple times, but if you saw the video, gunshot residue doesn't travel that far. You can have gunshot residue when you're shot at close range, but he wasn't that close, and he was running away. And he was shot in the cheek, the elbow, and the back. How does the gunshot residue get on his hands? But you said he was unarmed. I understand that. There are more details that came out during trial.
Now to the police shooting of a teenager that is sparking outrage. Overnight, a new wave of protests in Pittsburgh over the death of Antoine Rose. ABC's Kenneth Moten is there now with the demonstrations and what authorities are saying about the case. Kenneth, good morning.
Good morning, Adrian. Busy night on these streets for protesters and police. We were with them overnight as they marched through the city over that bridge right there to the interstate. At one point, they were just outside the baseball stadium right as the Pirates game was getting out. Outrage is growing in this community, in this area, as new details emerge about the police shooting death of Antoine Rose. Overnight, tense moments in Pittsburgh. Police in riot gear. Protesters in the streets. Demonstrators marched, shutting down roadways, an interstate, and this critical bridge, demanding justice for 17-year-old Antoine Rose.
I'm out here because it's inhumane to kill black children. And that was murder, what happened.
An unarmed Antoine shot and killed by East Pittsburgh police officer Michael Rosfeld as he ran away from a traffic stop earlier in the week. The district attorney is now revealing investigators found an empty 9mm gun clip in the teen's front pocket after the shooting.
I'm not going to talk about everything that happened that night, but you asked me the question, did he have a 9mm, did he have a clip? He had a clip in his one.
They're looking for an excuse. They're trying to find a reason to get this cop off.
Investigators say the car Antoine was riding in operated as a ride-share or taxi, but it also matched the description of a vehicle possibly involved in a drive-by shooting minutes before. Authorities say they have video, but wouldn't give any specifics. Attorneys for Antoine's family calling the new developments irrelevant.
Too many kids or young African-American males are being shot. They're dead. They're not here to tell the story. If they could just be here to tell the story, we might hear the other side.
The DA says Officer Rosfeld is now cooperating with this investigation after getting a new attorney. The prosecutor plans to speak more about the details of this case after Antoine is laid to rest Monday. Whit?
Kenneth Moten in Pittsburgh for us. Thanks so much.
And I stand corrected. That particular detail came out before the trial. Actually came out a couple of days after the shooting. So he had a clip, a 9mm clip in his pocket. And at trial, it turns out that he had gunshot residue on his hands. Are you still going to go with this he was unarmed thing? By the way, they found 2 guns in the car from which he ran. Are you still going to go with this he was unarmed thing? And he was in the car, which was the vehicle from which someone fired at least 9 times in a drive-by shooting. Are you still going to go with this idea? So let me get this straight. He's in a car in which a drive-by shooting occurs. He's got a gun clip in his pocket, gunshot residue on his hands. And there's guns in the car that he just left behind when he ran. Why'd he run? And the law for use of force by law enforcement is what it is in Pennsylvania, and it allows you to use lethal force when trying to effect an arrest on a fleeing suspect. Consequently, here's the result that you got in the trial that just concluded a few days ago.
There was anger on the streets of Pittsburgh last night after a jury acquitted a white former police officer who shot and killed an unarmed black teen as he fled a traffic stop. Hundreds of protesters voiced their outrage about the verdict and struggled to make sense of the controversial decision.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win.
A large crowd of protesters gathered outside of the Allegheny County Courthouse after a Pittsburgh jury found former police officer Michael Rosfeld not guilty in the shooting of 17-year-old Antoine Rose last June. Rose was fleeing a traffic stop when Rosfeld shot him 3 times in quick succession. He was riding in an unlicensed taxi that had been involved in a drive-by shooting minutes earlier.
No peace! No peace!
Hundreds of protesters lined the streets of Pittsburgh for several days after video of the shooting surfaced on social media. Rosfeld was sworn in just 2 hours before the deadly encounter. He was placed on administrative leave before he was eventually charged with criminal homicide. Rosfeld testified that he shot when he saw one of the suspects raise what he thought was a gun. His defense argued that he was within his rights to shoot on the grounds that he felt he and the community were in danger.
When they get out of the car and run, I think the law is he can shoot. I don't think the law. That is the law.
Attorneys for the Rose family said they knew they were a long way from a conviction.
He was unarmed, and he did not pose a threat to the officer or to the community. And the verdict today says that that is okay, that is acceptable behavior from a police officer.
Now, Rose's family will continue to pursue the federal civil rights lawsuit they filed last August against Rosfeld and East Pittsburgh. Rose's mother said that she will continue to speak up despite the outcome of the trial.
Let's back up a minute here. The verdict didn't say that the police officer's behavior was acceptable. The law, before there was ever a trial, said that if you run from a vehicle while an officer is making an arrest, he can shoot you. So it wasn't the verdict, it was the law. 9 whites, 3 blacks, unanimous acquittal. They followed the law. Now, in the previous clip before that, you heard a woman say it is inhumane to kill black children. I wonder how she feels about abortion in Pittsburgh. A lot of black children getting killed. Is that murder? Is that inhumane? Because this was not murder, and a jury has said so. This was not inhumane, and a jury has said that as well. Predictably, and I do mean predictably, you have the protests afterward, and I just marvel at the sameness of all this.
Today, anger on the streets of Pittsburgh. The outrage after a jury reached their decision in less than 4 hours Friday, finding a former East Pittsburgh police officer not guilty of murder or manslaughter.
Unfortunately, we have come to expect this kind of outcome all throughout the country.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom!
The jury, 9 white and 3 black, acquitted Michael Rosfeld, who was white, for the 2018 shooting of Antoine Rose, a 17-year-old who was black and unarmed. The shooting, caught on video, shows Rose right there in the white shirt and his friend running from police. Their car, Rosfeld said, matched the description of a car involved in a shooting nearby, and 2 guns were later found inside. Rosfeld fired 3 shots, hitting Rose in the back, the elbow, and the face. His defense, it happened very quickly, he said in court. My intent was to end the threat that was made against me.
He did his job, and nothing to do with the color of anybody that he was arresting.
After the verdict, Rosfeld's attorney's office was shut up. And today, a commitment to keep fighting and remembering an honor student and his son.
I'm angry, but I'm not. It hurts more than anything.
Molly Hunter, NBC News.
Why is an honor student in a car where a drive-by is being committed with a gun clip in his pocket and gunshot residue on his hands? Let me tell you what the problem is. It's not racist police. It is dumbness on the part of young black males. That's stupid. I'm an honor student. I'm a son. I'm a this. And you're also acting like, I'm going to say it, a thug. Why are you, the honor student, a junior, which means you have a father with the same name? What are you doing out there with a gun, participating in a drive-by shooting? So where is the outrage and where is the sympathy for the person who was being targeted in the drive-by shooting? Did they hit him, or as in a lot of drive-by shootings where those who were pulling the trigger so inaccurate they didn't hit anybody on purpose? I'm tired of this. I really am. From Trayvon Martin, who was not shot by a police officer, although they try to group all that together, to Michael Brown, to Tamir Rice, to the guy who got shot in the Walmart in Ohio, to Garner, who got choked in New York, to Freddie Gray, who probably beat himself up in the back of a van by trying to get himself injured, to all these things. I'm tired of it. Black people, your approach to this is pitiful. With all your crying, this happens less than 200 times in a year. Where it happens to whites, sometimes more than twice that often, and I don't see them doing the same amount of crying. And in almost all these cases, we can find something going on in the person's present or in his recent history that makes you go, man, now I understand why the police would even be coming around this dude. Unarmed? No, you're not unarmed if you got a gun clip in your pocket, gunshot residue in your hands, and you left the gun on the floor of the car as you ran away. That's not quite unarmed. And if you're going to do illegal things, maybe you should know the law before you participate, and you would have just stayed in the car and taken what came to you for that, which meant you probably wouldn't have gotten shot. I marvel at the ability of black people to blame everybody but their own for the things that befall them. An honor student with a future shouldn't be out in the street with a gun. I'm sorry, shouldn't be. And then having to run from police. Why would you do that? This isn't a racist police thing. This is a stupid teenager thing. Maybe black people should spend more of their time protesting the stupidity of their young males and less time worried about the alleged racism of anyone else. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you is my prayer. And until next week, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.